Hello, my friends on YouTube. Hope you're having a good week. I'm having a great week here. Welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. And in this installment, I'm going to be talking a little more about science fiction, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about fantasy too. But first, I want to announce that I'm having my second book signing at the West End Plaza. I'm going to be at C. Simpson's Used Bookstore, which is here in Broadheadsville, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to be there selling my books at a discount, signing them for people, answering questions. And, depending on the weather, we'll see how things go because I would love to do like a little book reading and stuff like that. But we'll see what happens once we're there. But I am very much looking forward to that. The first one went really well. And that was at an unconventional kind of a scene because I was at a coffee roasters, Morgan Rakes, which is in Effort, Pennsylvania. Fantastic place. I highly recommend them. They're great coffee roasters. They don't serve brewed coffee. They hand roast coffee for you to brew. It's a bit of a difference there. But wonderful people there, and they really do make the best coffee beans I've ever used. And I like coffee. Kind of like my main character, Marik. And here we're going to get into a little bit about the science fiction part. The main character in Crew of Ganges, which is the first book of the Crucible Spirals trilogy, is Marik Langman. He's an ex-rattler, which in our terms means he's an ex-biker, who lost his way and decided to devote himself more to the ship by becoming a bodyguard for important people. And one of the commissions he ended up getting was to be the bodyguard for Jake Bergstrom, who is the captain's son. And therein lies the tale, where Marik must now put everything aside to figure out what's going on with the ship. Now, this is not a spoiler because it happens in the second chapter, but the captain is killed in a terrorist attack by the Strifers. And the Strifers are these odd villainous characters who wear green robes and wear rat masks to hide their faces so that they can't be recognized by the AI. So this way they do their nefarious deeds covered up. The Strifers are a major thorn in the side of the officers of Ganges and for the crew. Most of the crew in Ganges are very devoted to their mission. They want to bring dead planets to life. They want to terraform, but the Strifers see it as a form of pollution and demand that it ends or else. And at one point, they take that one step and they end up killing the captain and several other officers, including both of Jake's parents, the captain and his mother, who was chief of Stellar Sector. So Jake is left with just a few people left in his life, his uncle Colum, who's the executive officer, and Marik. And Marik becomes his mentor. He becomes his guide in life. Because Marik's made a lot of mistakes, and I find that people who have made mistakes early on in life, and even, let's face it, midway on, they learn from those mistakes and are able to pass that wisdom down to the next generation. Or at least one would hope that people could do that. Making a mistake is not as terrible as not learning from it. Doing something wrong is pardonable if you learn from your offense and don't do it again. This is a wisdom that Marik seems to innately have, and the AI sees that in him, and so it's trying to help reprogram Marik to be a better crewman, although constantly remonstrating him on his foul language. Yes, there is foul language in my books. Yes, there is, because there is foul language in life. I did not shrink back from what life is filled with. So many times I find, especially in the last decade or so, people pulling away from what life contains. Life is not G rated. It's not PG rated. In fact, it's not rated at all. Life is filled with all kinds of crazy things, and we take a lot of it for granted, and we don't feel comfortable talking about what the human experience really contains. Uh, there can be drug use, there can be sex, things like, foul language, or, being blasphemous, or, these things are all things that crop up in life. There is violence. There is also joy. There's hope. There, there's compassion and generosity. You have to show the good with the bad. You have to show all of life's little nuances and some of its bigger nuances in order for a work to be even marginally believable. The minute you start censoring things too much, the less effective your story is going to be, because it doesn't reflect the reality that we're in. Now, if you want to get away from reality, my recommendation is fantasy, because the fantastical worlds of fantasy do not have to be as believable as, say, something like science fiction, which is supposed to be happening in the world we live in, just in the future, or in an alternate path, or sometimes even in the past. So science fiction is very grounded in our reality. And so I feel science fiction should reflect everything about the human experience in our reality. Fantasy, on the other hand, doesn't have that constraint. And so that is a path where one can eschew the normal human experience situations that might make people uncomfortable. Sorry if people are uncomfortable with the things that happen in life, but they do happen in life. Uh, but that's probably something for another talk, for another time. In the meantime, fantasy. I do write fantasy. I have one fantasy novel published named Clockmaker, and I have another one that is right now in proofreading, and that's called Favored Son. I'm hoping to publish that by the end of this year. And I have another one that is in the works. So I do write fantasy along with science fiction. Now, in my fantasy works, I decided that there are enough books about elves and dwarves and, dragons and, things like that. Didn't really want to rehash a lot of old themes that keep cropping up that are there to mimic Tolkien. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the fantasy out there really owes everything to Tolkien. But what if you went somewhere different? What if you went in different directions? Clockmaker does not have any dwarves or elves or things like that. In fact, there are no humans in Clockmaker. Instead, there is Clockmaker. That is his name, and that's what he does. He makes clocks. He builds clocks. He was born in his hearth at his home. He has no parents. This is what happens. The old clockmaker dies, and a new clockmaker is birthed in the home. Outside of his home is the road. Everyone goes down the road of Everpath, the name of his universe, in one direction. No one goes up the road. In fact, most of the characters in Everpath would find the idea nauseating. No, everyone goes down the road. That is the only direction you're allowed to go, because it's the only option you have. It's the only one you ever think about. He builds clocks, and then he gives them to the roadmen, who have these huge wagons that are full of goods. He trades his clocks for food and for new materials to build more clocks, or, maybe other things that he might need, candles or a book or something, or, maybe a new hat. And they trade with him, and then they go down to the next house, which is a mile away in the forest of Everpath. Everpath is a very narrow world. It's only about 500 yards wide and infinitely long. like one infinite spaghetti strand. So he's never seen the same two roadmen twice, never, nor would he expect to. This is where Clockmaker begins. And in this particular novel, what ends up happening is a shadow from the woods, and shadows are very dangerous. They're creepy. They only come out at night, but this one was offended by Clockmaker and threatens to eat him and starts terrorizing Clockmaker in his home. Clockmaker is so beside himself that he decides to pack up what few belongings he can carry and try to gain passage with the roadmen to a new home. And that begins the story. Clockmaker is a lot about self-discovery. It's a lot about understanding where you came from and why you have the responses that you have, and whether or not they fit circumstances you find yourself in, and how one has to adapt. And for Clockmaker, this is very, very difficult. All he does is make clocks, though he does make a nice stew and a good bread. At home, he's a bit of a cook. But he certainly is not named chef. He's named Clockmaker. That's what he is. He is forced in his adventures to change. And that makes him question not only who he is, but what he is. I found it refreshing to write a fantasy novel in which there were none of the usual things that you might find in a D&D game or in Tolkien or in any of a number of fantasy books. This was a very strange tale. A couple of people have called it psychedelic. I agree, it is. There's a lot of weirdnesses that occur. One of which is Clockmaker ends up being thrown through the walls of his world and ends up in a new universe with completely different rules and is always trying to find his way home. Or should he? And a lot of questions here, so a lot of interesting questions. Everyone he meets throughout his journey doesn't even resemble a human being. In fact, Clockmaker is probably the most human of the characters, but he's not human. If you saw him, you would not think of him as being quite human. And certainly his behavior would confuse you. He doesn't know what a baby is. He doesn't know what childhood means. If you told him, well, I'm educated in something, he wouldn't understand a thing. He was born knowing how to make clocks. What education? He knows how to read a diagram. He knows how to make a blueprint. It just comes naturally to him. That's not human. So, but he is the most human in appearance. The rest, they're a little strange. I'm going to leave it to you to read the book to find out what his friends look like, where they're from, and how they're helping him or not. It's a very strange tale, I admit, but it is, I think, a nice step away from the rest of the world. So in that one, there is no foul language. I would rate that as a PG just because there's a couple of fights here and there. It's not really, there's nothing sexual about that book because, well, Clockmaker doesn't even know what that is, and he doesn't see things the way we do. He sees things from a very innocent point of view. So it is a very innocent tale. It's very much like a fable. So if you're looking for something more fable-like, then that's the one to go to. Although it is, I think, thought-provoking. I think it asks a lot of questions. Some of them just as serious as the questions that you will find in science fiction. And that's the thing. When you're writing a novel, I don't care what genre it is, what questions are you asking? What are you looking for? What are you asking the reader to process? These are the things that you should keep in mind if you're writing a novel. So, but in any case, I'm going to be at my next book signing this Saturday. Yes, Saturday. That will be the 9th, and I'm really looking forward to it. The time will be from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So that should be a lot of fun. And I am going to be there to answer questions, sell novels, and hopefully entertain some people. Hope you're there. Thank you so much for watching, and please hit the subscribe button. It really helped me out. Thank you very much, and take care, everyone.